Look, what's interesting about this uh, coronavirus incident, which I'm hoping we're really paying attention to, is the idea that the world we created is not working. Not necessarily completely, because there are parts that are working. The fact that there's only about 3-4% of the people that actually got affected, and um, even less death, even though one more death is not ideal. But the fact of the matter is, people died. People die in a disease. People uh, die in a war against something that you can see. So that's a mute point. That's it has happened. The most important thing that I'm hoping that as leaders we learn from this coronavirus is to recognize the world we created and why it's necessary to close the inequalities. Because the big challenge in terms of the inequalities is the whole idea that if you have money, you are okay. But that's not true. We are a systemically connected people, which means if you do one thing in one place and you don't do it in another, it's going to affect you. If you look at what is happening across Europe, across the Americas, some of the richest countries are unable to deal with this virus. And it's not because they don't necessarily have resources, it's because at the end of the day, we concern ourselves a lot more with looking good as opposed to doing good. And as a result, you find that the stuff that we are supposed to do, which is make sure that every single one of the people in the country is at least able to live at the level where they can afford their health, they can afford their lifestyle, but most importantly, they can afford education. If we are able to do that, because those are the gaps that are missing, people are not able to go to the hospital, people are not able to go to the doctor and all of those things because of this virus. And that's what it's exposed. It's exposed the level of education that exists and how we have educated people and how people really don't understand. But I think the most critical thing is people have lost trust in governments. And as a result, when people are being asked to self distance and all of those other sophisticated mechanisms, you start realizing that none of it works. Why? Because we have created the inequalities that are currently in the system and are making it very difficult for us to fight this virus. And my suggestion to a lot of the leaders is in your space, because it's also very easy to look at government and blame government and point fingers. And I've always said, particularly from a South African perspective, I don't know about other countries. I always said that the South African corporate is not very patriotic. And the one thing that we really need to do as leaders is essentially to start thinking about how are we as corporates, how are we as organizations, how are we working together with government to essentially close the gaps of inequality across the world. And we are talking about it like it's a South African thing. What's going to happen with the people in the squatters? What's going to happen with the people in Khayelitsha and the other townships and all of those things? It's a global problem everywhere in the world. If you think about it, in Rio, in Ecuador, in Yemen, in India, in Bangladesh, it's just really, really bad because we created a world that is illusionary. We are leaders that do not pay attention to humans. We are paying a lot of attention to money. And if we start thinking differently, we can talk all the nice things that we want to talk about and talk about humanity and connectivity and all of that. But if it isn't demonstrated by how much we show our care for our brothers and our sisters, our people, and make their lives at least enough for them to be able to afford their lives. They don't have to be rich. They just need to afford their lives. They need to afford the basics, food, as well as health, and then be able to build the relationships. That's all.